Hello, folks. This is Andrew Gilmore with another episode of Mostly Movies, Maybe Music. And my guest today is somebody I've known for quite a while. He's a good friend, and his name is Lou Sabini. And Lou, well, it's kind of become a joke at this point that most of my guests are film historians, but those are the people I hang out with, so those are the people who tend to come on here. But Lou is a film historian, film collector, and also a writer. He's written a couple of books, and I don't have his first book, but I have his second book here, which is Sex and the Cinema, the Pre-Code Years, which is one of my favorite subjects. Of course, I've talked about pre-code movies on this show before. And that book is, I believe it's still on Amazon if people want to get it, along with his first book, which was about a John Ford film called They Were Expendable. So if you put Lou Sabini in your Amazon search, then you'll probably find those. And anyway, I've known Lou through Facebook for maybe 10 years or more. It's been quite a while. And we've spoken on the phone a couple of times recently, and he asked me to come on and said he just wants to share some of his stories about his interest in film and collecting film and the people he's known and that kind of thing. So I thought, why not? We should have Lou on here. I've had some of the other people in our circle of friends on here, people that we all know. So now it's Lou's turn to subject himself to my stupid questions. So we'll see how that goes today. So thank you for being here, Lou. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here, Andrew.
Yeah. Were you going to say something just then?
No, I was going to say I know your questions aren't going to be stupid.
Yeah, that's just my usual self-deprecating humor. That's
Yeah, I know. That's good. I like that. I do the same thing.
yeah, I know.
One thing about me, and I just want to tell you, I never have bragged about what I've done, who I've met. Even on my real life, I've always kept things very quiet as to, who I've done business with in the past, who I've met. And I have met a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of fun throughout my lifetime. Sue and I have been married, it's going to be 51 years in April. And she shared every bit of this with me. And
Sure.
she's wonderful. And she loves old movies. Thank God.
Yeah.
So anyhow.
Hang on, I'm just making a technical adjustment here.
Okay.
It's not actually. I clicked the button I was supposed to click, but it's not working. But that's something's going on with Zoom. But anyway, we're on and we're still recording, so never mind.
Okay.
Things happen when you're live. Anyway, I realized that some of our friends are going to be watching this, but there will also be people watching who probably don't know you. So I just wanted to start from the beginning. You're from Stamford, Connecticut, and
Yes.
before
Born
we
raised.
yeah, so before we get into talking about movies, do you want to just tell the people something about growing up in Stamford and something about your family and that kind of thing?
Well, yeah. My family was very prominent here in Stamford. We owned the largest furniture and appliance company in Fairfield County, and it was called Sabini's, P. Sabini and Company. And we also had a moving and storage company. We were agents to United Van Lines. Our furniture department sold 90 houses of furniture. I worked there for many years, and I managed it for years and years and years. And we liquidated the business in 1986, and I went to work elsewhere. But film was always my passion, and I wanted to do something, with film. When I started going to college, I went to the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and I became reacquainted with William K. Everson. He was my film history teacher, and I'll tell you, we hit it off the first day. He turned into my favorite person. I couldn't get enough of this guy. I was always at his apartment watching movies, and years later, after Sue and I got married, he used to come to Stanford. We would pick him up at the train station, and we would spend a day watching movies at our house. He'd bring films over, or we'd go over to his house. And sometimes his guests were just incredible. One time, Roddy McDowell, we got to
Wow.
be with Roddy McDowell for a day, and that was great. This was just months before he passed away. And I was shocked to hear that he died because he looked so great.
Yeah.
But Bill Everson introduced Sue and I to the pre-code era. And the thing about old movies, and you're a lot younger than I am, and I know a lot of the people out here are a lot younger than I am. A lot of people who fought in World War II are a lot younger than I am. If I'm just kidding, you didn't even smile. Anyhow, it was very tough to find movies that you wanted to see on television. We had 7 channels here in the New York area, But every one of them used to show old movies. But if you wanted to see something that you might have seen in a book, and I had scads of books on old movies. And if you wanted to see a movie like The Yellow Balloon, which was a British film noir, you couldn't see it. And I mean, how am I going to see this movie? Well, Bill Everson. And then I never even heard of Pre-Code until I met William K. Everson, and he turned Sue and I onto Pre-Code immediately. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, the first two we saw were Babyface and Three on a Match.
Yep.
I mean, whoa! I mean, these are incredible.
Yeah.
It was like watching. It was like being Alice watching old movies through the looking glass. You were
Sure.
seeing a very different world there than you had seen in other old movies. So it was just fascinating, and I learned so much from Bill. Sadly, he left us. He was so young when he passed away. He was only 67.
Hmm.
He died of cancer. And near the ending, he kept it very quiet that he was very sick. But I knew something was wrong one time when we invited him. A friend of mine, Rob Birarelli, who you might know, I don't know whether you do,
No,
but
I don't know him.
Rob Birarelli was running a film series at the Stanford Theater Works here in Stanford. It was an old barn. They put on live productions, and they were showing the classic movies. And he would have special people introduce the movies, and I got Bill Everson, and he wanted to introduce Of Mice and Men, but sadly he couldn't make it the week before when we had scheduled it. So we had him introduce The Grapes of Wrath, which he really wasn't that crazy about. He doesn't like the movie as much as the Lewis Milestone 1939 film, but he introduced The Grapes of Wrath. And to my surprise, I'm sitting in the audience. He said, "I'm sorry, folks, but I can't be here for the film, and I won't be here for the Q&A. I have to get back to Manhattan." And I mean, this was probably just a ruse because he wasn't feeling well.
Hmm.
"I have to get back to Manhattan because I have another engagement." So he said, "But my friend Lou Sabini will answer all your questions." And I'm like, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
I didn't even prepare for this." And I didn't know The Grapes of Wrath that well, but I did okay. But after that, he had me doing a few other things for him, and I would go in his stead and introduce movies. I mean, can you imagine, scheduling Bill Everson and having Lou Sabini show up? I mean, that was pretty disappointing to the audience. But I suppose I made somewhat of a name there by doing that. But it was just a lot of fun, and like I've said, I've met so many people through the years through Bill.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I met Claire Trevor
Oh,
years
wow.
ago. She was at a I think Ed Hulse brought her to some film show in New York, and Bill Everson was there, and I got to meet her. Sue got to meet her as well. So lovely, lovely lady.
I'm sure she was. Yeah.
She told a lot of great stories about working with John Ford and working with William Wyler, and because of course she was nominated for an Oscar in 1937 for Dead End, that small 4-minute bit she did in the movie, and
Yeah.
she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, but she didn't win it. She won in 1948 for Key Largo.
Right. Yeah. Well, you did go ahead of some of my questions there because you gave me a lot there. So I want to back up a little bit and
Sorry.
just that's okay. I mean, you can just go where you want to go, but it's my job to steer the ship here. But
Yeah, just go. Okay.
I just wanted to go back to the beginning of your interest in movies because a lot of people watch movies when they're kids. But what was it that kind of spurred you forward to this deep passion that you have for old movies?
Okay, that's a good question because when we were little, when I was little, 3 years old, we had a major flood in Stamford, Connecticut, and we lived down by the water, and it flooded everybody out. And my father and mother were building a house in North Stamford, which was a very rural area. And when we moved up there, I was 3, and there were no kids to play with. I had an older sister. I have an older sister who's 6 years older than I am, and I mean, obviously she didn't want to hang out with me, being 6 years younger. So I used to watch a lot of television. So I became acquainted with, the cartoons pretty much.
Yeah.
But one day my mother brought me to a movie matinee at the old Rialto Theater in Stanford, which has been out of business since I was about 6 or 7.
Hmm.
This was in 1957. And lo and behold, the movie was Dance with Me, Henry.
Hmm.
with Abbott and Costello. One of Abbott and Costello's best movies, I might say. No, I'm just kidding. But anyhow, I loved it, and I loved Lou Costello. I probably didn't quite understand the whole movie, but I just loved Lou Costello. And when I came home, I was raving about it to my dad. And my dad, having grown up pretty much in the 40s, he was born in 1920. He was more familiar with Abbott and Costello, and he loved them too. And so we used to sit and watch the Abbott and Costello show, the reruns on WPIX Channel 11
Sure.
every week, I guess it was on. I can't remember when. But that's what happened. And then one Saturday, we happened to be watching Channel 11, and they were airing Saps at Sea with Laurel and Hardy.
Hmm.
And that was like, oh my God, these guys are even. These guys are so great. And I just had this love for Laurel and Hardy after that. And in 1961, Jack McCabe, Professor Jack McCabe, wrote a book called Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy.
Yep.
And I read it, and my father read the book. And it said at the end of the book, today Stan Laurel lives in Santa Monica, California. So my father said to me, well, why don't you write to him? I said, Dad, there's no address there. All it says is he lives in Santa Monica, California. And this was before zip codes. So
Right.
all I did was put down Stan Laurel, Santa Monica, California. And lo and behold, a week and a half later, I got a response from him. So we became pen pals, and he sent me an autograph. I've got a couple of them. He sent me an autograph, and we used to write back and forth talking about his movies. Now, mind you, a lot of his movies, a lot of the Laurel and Hardy comedies, the only ones that were accessible to us at that time were the Hal Roach talkies. We
Yeah.
had no access to the silent films, and the only way we'd have access to those silent films were to buy them from a company in Davenport, Iowa called Black Hawk Films.
Right.
And I started collecting an 8mm when I was about 6. Every Christmas I'd get an 8mm two reeler, and back then they only cost $9.98. I remember the price. And I used to see the 16mm talkies used to go for $34.98, the two reelers. And it was in 1964, on my 12th birthday, I got a 16mm projector from my parents. Spoiled kid, huh? And I wrote to Stan Laurel, and I said, "Oh, I just got a 16mm projector," and he congratulated me, and he said, "I suggest you drop Black Hawk Films send them a letter that you like their listing of 16mm talkies." And my first sound Laurel and Hardy film was Way Out West. And so I've got virtually all the Laurel and Hardy comedies, including their lesser films that they did at 20th Century Fox and Metro Goldwyn Mayer, their later ones as well. But yeah, I'm still a big fan of Laurel and Hardy.
Sure. Do you remember anything else that you talked to Stan about through the letters?
Let
Anything
me think.
specific?
I mean, I asked him, at 12 years old, you're not really, and I talked to him. I could tell you how the conversation went. I called him Christmas week of 1964. Now, mind you, that was 2 months before he died, and his wife Ida answered the phone, and because she would always see who was calling first. So I told her who I was, and she said, yes, he's expecting you. And he got on the phone, and I heard this old man's voice, and he said hello, and he was very hoarse.
Mm.
And I said, hello, Mr. Laurel. And he said, yes. And I said, this is Lou Sabini. And I thought, this can't be Stan Laurel. It didn't sound like him. But as we talked, it sounded more and more like him.
Right.
And, he was asking me how old I was and that sort of thing. And I asked him, what's your favorite Laurel and Hardy comedy? And he said, well, what do you mean, shorts or features? I said, well, let's start with the shorts. He said, well, my favorite is Putting Pants on Philip, which I had not seen yet. And then he said, Fra Diavolo, or The Devil's Brother, was his favorite. And I had only seen the cut downs that they used to show on television back in the day, because Hal Roach Studios no longer owned the rights to Fra Diavolo. Metro Goldwyn Mayer did. So Fra Diavolo and Bonnie Scotland were probably the most elusive of the Hal Roach features that Laurel and Hardy did.
Yeah, and while we're on that, I know you also met Hal Roach. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and I'm going to start another story there, because this is part of that story. In in 1979, we were expecting our first child, Lauren, our daughter Lauren, and we were going out to California because Sue's best friend was getting married in Rancho Santa Fe, and we landed in LA airport. And in the meantime, I had made an appointment to meet Hal Roach to go to his house. But prior to this, something horrible happened. I was at work at Sabini's, and I was waiting on a woman. And my father came over to me and he said, "Son," he said, "excuse me," to the customer, "excuse me, son, I have to tell you, there are two men here from the FBI who want to speak with you." And by that time, I was buying other movies besides Laurel and Hardy. I had gotten into the black market, so to speak.
Huh.
And so what happened was these two guys came over, and my father said to me, "Oh, finish with your customer." And I said, "Dad, I can't." I said, "I want to talk to them. Why don't you finish up for me?" He said, "Okay, fine." So these guys took me into our coffee room, and they said, "Mr. Sabini." I said, "Yes." And I'm going to mention a name, okay, because the man has passed away, so I don't think we're doing any harm to this guy. They said, "Are you a film collector?" And I said, "Yes, I'm most definitely a film collector." And they said, "Who do you buy from?" I said, "Well, mainly from Black Hawk Films and Castle Films and Thunderbird Films, which were all places who were quote unquote legal, Wonderland, you know." And they said, "Have you ever heard of a man named Les Rabinsky?" And I said, "No." They said, "Are you sure you've never heard of a man named Les Rabinsky?" I said, "Absolutely not." And they kept on prodding me. And they said, "He lives in Little Neck, Long Island." And by that time, I knew who they were talking about, but I was still playing dumb like a dope. And I said, "No, I've never heard of him." And he said, "Okay, well, we have proof that you've been buying from Les Rabinsky." I said, "Oh." And he said, "Do you want to tell us about it?" And I said, "You don't happen to mean Les Rabinowitz, do you?" And they said, "Oh." And they looked at it and they said, "Oh, yes, it's Les Rabinowitz." And they said, "What movies have you purchased from him?" And I was thinking of all public domain films. I said, "The Flying Deuces, They Made Me a Criminal, and Meet John Doe." And I'm
Right.
sitting there smiling at them, and they said, "Anything else?" And I said, "No, that's it." And they said, "Mr. Sabini," and the guy reaches into his valise and he pulls out 40 canceled checks of mine. And he said, "What about these?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm dead to rights." And he said, "Start naming what titles." And I said, "Okay, Captain's Courageous and Hail the Conquering Hero and blah, 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 Sullivan's Travels." And it seemed like, they were just listening to me. And they said, "Okay, that's not quite what we're looking for." I said, "Well, what are you looking for?" They said, "Well, he's been taking movies from movie theaters when they were playing, taking them out at night and
Hmm.
making negatives at a lab in New York City and selling 16 millimeter prints." And I knew he was doing that because in 1977, he contacted me and he said, "Lou, do you want to buy a print of Annie Hall?" I said, "What the hell is Annie Hall?" And he said, "Oh, it's a new movie with Woody Allen. It hasn't come out yet." So I was like, "Ooh." And I thought, no, I don't want that. But luckily, nothing happened. The only harm that it did to me is I had to change my underwear after that little after that little problem. Yeah, but it was really scary. But when I was out in California, this had just happened. And the first night we were out there, Sue and I went to a place called, it was the Silent Movie Theater. And I'm trying to think of where it was, but I guess it doesn't matter. And we were standing in line, and I heard someone yell, "Lou Sabini." And I'm like, "What? Someone knows me out here?" And I turned around. It was Richard W. Bann. He was standing in line too. We were going to see I think it was a Mary Pickford film, if I'm not mistaken. And he said to me, he came over and he said, "I heard you got busted." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you hear John Wayne got busted and Roddy McDowell and Frank Sinatra Jr.?" I'm like, "Oh my God, really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "But nothing happened to John Wayne because John Wayne was able to acquire all of his films legally. The studios gave them to him as
Uh,
payment for his films." And I was like, and I said, and he asked me, he said, "Did anything?" I said, "How did you find out?" Because back then there was no internet. And he said, "Oh, I knew immediately. I knew a few days ago." I said, "It only happened a few days ago." So I must have talked to a good friend of mine like Jack Roth or somebody, and he probably told Dick Bann, or you know how it goes. So anyhow, thankfully nothing happened. So the next day we had our appointment with Hal Roach, and this was in 1979. This was during the gas shortage, and I rang the doorbell with Sue, and an old lady answered the door, and she looks at me and she goes, and I said, "Hi, Mrs. Roach," and she said, "Yes." I said, "I'm Lou Sabini. This is my wife Sue. We're here to see your husband." And she said, "Oh, okay." And so, come on in. So we walk in, and she looks at me and she goes, "Are you Italian?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And she goes, "Oh, interesting." So she takes us out on the patio. It was an enclosed patio overlooking his pool. And up on the side, they had photographs of all the movie stars that Hal Roach had come into contact with. And, we're waiting for him. And we bought a bottle of wine for him. And he comes walking in. And I was expecting some doddering old man. At the time, he was 87, I guess. Yeah, he would have been 87 at that time. I thought some doddering old man was going to come in with a walker. This guy comes walking in like he was, the head coach of Yale or something. He was in great shape. And he sits down, and he couldn't be nicer. I mean, we were talking about, Laurel and Hardy and his, his other films, Harold Lloyd and Our Gang and all that stuff. And the doorbell rang. And during that time, I'm talking, and I heard a guy go, "Is that Lou Sabini?" And Hal Roach goes, "You know Dick Ban?" And I said, "Yeah." And Dick Ban came in, and he was sitting. I have photographs of that day when
Great.
Dick, Sue, and I were there. And Hal Roach was always teasing Dick Ban. And I remember him saying, he goes, "Man, what a cheapskate you are. Here I've known you for years and years and years. Sabini comes here for the first time, and he brings me a bottle of wine." And so anyhow, we asked Hal Roach if we could take a photograph with him, and he said, "Sue's got to sit on my lap." So he sat on her lap, and we have a picture of Sue sitting on Hal Roach's lap. But it was a wonderful meeting. I mean, it was about a half hour long, maybe 45 minutes. But I had a great time. And I had met Dick Ban many years earlier when he lived in New York City through Bill Everson. And, we weren't close at that time. I mean, we knew each other. We would see each other at, I didn't go to many film festivals or anything like that because I was working. I had a family and I had two kids, a house, and, it was kind of difficult. Plus I was buying movies, which was worse than being a drug addict because it was so damn expensive.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, we bought so many movies, Sue, and I mean, we would buy like 2 or 3 a month, and you're talking about $300-400 a pop. And we were both working at the time, but it was still very hard, especially with a mortgage. And I mean, I look back on it in retrospect, and I say, you know what, Lou, you must have been doing very well back then. I just didn't realize it. But anyhow, that's my story on Hal Roach, and it was just a wonderful day. And when Sue and I first got married in 1975, we got married I called Ida Laurel, Stan Laurel's widow, and I said, "Could we come visit you?" And she said, "Certainly." And she had a thick Russian accent. It was so hard to understand her over the phone. Even in person, it was tough to understand her. So we showed up right on time because I'm always on time. Rang the doorbell at the Oceana where they lived, 849 Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica. And she answers the door in curlers. And I'm thinking to myself, "Lady, why are you in curlers? I mean, didn't you know that we were going to be here?" And she looks at me and she goes, "Oh, Lou, I'm so sorry." And I said, "That's okay, Ida." She said, "Jerry Lewis just left here. And I'm so sorry. I couldn't get him out of here quick enough." And I was like, no problem, because I would have been so intimidated meeting Jerry Lewis because at that time I knew virtually nothing about the man. I mean, granted, he's a great talent and all that, but I did not know anything about Jerry Lewis. I would have been stymied at what to talk about with him. Yeah. But we were as we walked into the apartment, there was a big wicker trunk, this huge wicker trunk, and on it said Stan Laurel Theater. And I looked at it and I said, "Ida, what's that?" And she said, "Oh, those are all Stan's costumes." And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
really? That is incredible. I mean, I wanted to say, open it up,
Right.
you know? But and speaking of his costumes, years ago when Sue and I became friends with Chuck McCann, we went to his house. In his house, he had all these various mementos from movie stars. He had Douglas Fairbanks Jr.'s outfit from Gunga Din. He had Sidney Greenstreet's white outfit from Casablanca. And
Wow.
lo and behold, he had one of Stan Laurel's derbies. And Sue took a picture of me with it on. And I've never posted that anywhere because I look like a damn fool. And but go ahead. Any other questions?
Yeah, well, these are good stories. I'm enjoying just sitting here and listening, so maybe I
I'm,
don't
I'm,
have to ask questions. Well, just
so
talk.
many
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I've got so many stories. I
Yeah,
could go on and on for days.
well, that's what you're here for. But
Yeah. Okay. We'll stay on for a few days. Okay.
yeah, I don't have anything to do. Well, just speaking of people that you met, I wrote down, I looked at other interviews you've done and took notes, and you also met Sylvia Sidney. That must have been an experience.
I didn't meet Sylvia Sidney. What happened was I was doing a film class at Pace University, and it was a course on film, social dramas of the 1930s, and Sylvia Sidney appeared in You Only Live Once, Dead End, Fury. So she was in a number of 1930s social dramas. And a friend
Sure.
of mine who had just written a book about Ronald Reagan's film career told me that he had interviewed Sylvia Sidney and she lived in Danbury, Connecticut. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'm going to have her try to come to my class to introduce one of the films. So I look, and he said to me, so Lou, she's in the phone book. You'll find her. So I looked in the phone book, and there was only one Sidney in Danbury, Connecticut, excuse me. And it was Samuel Sidney. And so I dialed the phone. I thought, maybe she's going, maybe that's her husband's name. I knew nothing about her. So I called her up, and this woman with a very gruff voice, hello. And I said, hello, is this Sylvia Sidney? Miss Sidney. And I'm like, oh. I said, is this Miss Sidney? She said, yes, who is this? And I said, well, Miss Sidney, my name's Lou Sabini. What do you want? And I mean, she was really tough. And Bill Everson had told me prior that she could be very difficult. Well, within 10 minutes, I had her purring.
Hmm.
Thank God, because I was ready to give up afterwards. But we were talking about her film career. She was talking about working with William Wyler, who she hated, how Joel McCrea was one of the nicest people she ever worked with, that she loved Fritz Lang, that who else? Spencer Tracy. She loved doing the movie Fury, and she called that the greatest social drama that was ever made. Personally, I don't agree with that. I think I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang,
Yeah.
or They Won't Forget were the two best of the 1930s. I think that the ending of Fury is just a little too pat, typical MGM ending.
I was
But
gonna mention Heroes for Sale too.
oh, Heroes for Sale is marvelous. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just reading about that movie this morning with Richard Barthelmess. He's one of my favorites. I mean, I
Hmm.
love Richard Barthelmess. I have a movie that the Library of Congress didn't have a print of called 4 Hours to Kill, and they made a copy of it for my print a few years back. And it's a great movie if you ever get to see it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so Sylvia Sidney, we were talking about her career, and I wanted to delve into the more the rarer films that I had that she probably hadn't seen in many years. And I said, I have a print of Confessions of a Co-Ed. She said, oh, that was my first starring film. That's a terrible movie. And I said, well, which one that I happen to love is The Miracle Man
Yes.
with Chester Morris. And she said, the worst movie I ever made. I said, Miss Sidney, I'm sorry, but I disagree with you. Every time I've shown that to my film class or to company, it has always gone over very well. You'll have to see it again. Would you like me to bring it over to you? No. I was going to bring it over the projector and everything and show it. No, I don't want to see it. But she was good after that. And I asked her, I said, so how did you like Chester Morris? And she said, Chet Morris, he was the nicest guy in the world, but the worst actor I had ever seen. And I thought, oh God, because I'm a big Chester Morris fan. Let's
Yeah.
face it. I know a lot of his movies. One of my favorite Christmas movies of all time is the 1936 version of Three Godfathers. But yeah, she was a piece of work, and she was kind of bitter because she had lost her son
Hmm.
to Lou Gehrig's disease, and she was talking about that. And she said, and the only young people only remember me because of Beetlejuice.
Right.
And that's too bad that because she had such a marvelous career in the 30s. We spoke about Alfred Hitchcock, and she talked about how, and Hitchcock has talked about this in his in interviews, but the scene where she kills Oscar Homolka, she didn't like how it was scripted. She wanted dialogue, and she said to Hitchcock, "I'm not doing it unless there's dialogue." And Hitchcock said, "Okay, what if we do it my way and we'll do it your way?" She said, "Fine." So they shot it with and without dialogue. And she said to me, she said, I had to, after seeing both versions, I had to agree with Hitch. He was right. And she said he was just such a great filmmaker and very patient. And, he never raised his voice. I mean, I hate some of the things they say about him, but oh well, that's
Yeah.
now that we're getting farther and farther away from reality because these people have been dead so long, there's a lot of things that they make up nowadays that I really can't stand listening to.
Hmm. Well, I guess we won't go down that path, but
No, no, let's not.
no. Well, I guess another name I should mention. You saw Cary Grant in person when he was on tour.
Yes, that's right. We saw Cary Grant. Yes, we did, and he was terrific. I mean, um, the way that all started. He was staying right down the street from us there's a hotel down the street. It's not called the Marriott. I can't remember the name of it back then. But anyhow, he was staying there, and I really wanted to meet him. And my father had a lot of pull, and he said to me, he said, "Don't worry, I'll get you to meet him." But Cary Grant didn't want to meet anybody, but that's okay.
Hmm.
I understand that. So anyhow, Sue and I went to this thing, and we were sitting dead center. And the way the show began, the theater is pitch black. All the lights were down, and all of a sudden they showed clips from Cary Grant and all these great clips from his movies. And the lights came on, and he was sitting on a stool, and he goes, "Good evening, I'm Cary Grant," and everybody just burst out laughing. And he was able to tackle the most difficult questions. I mean, rude questions.
Hmm.
Like people asked, "Is it true you're gay?"
Wow.
And and his wife was sitting right in the front there, and he said, "No, that's not true." He said, "Yes, it's true. I met Randy Scott, when we were making Hot Saturday. I was estranged from my wife, Virginia Sherrill, and Randy had asked me, 'Do you want to come and live with me?'" So he said he did. And Paramount, after hearing this, they thought they would do a little gag photo shoot of Cary Grant and Randolph Scott, with Cary Grant in an apron, with a bow in the back of his apron in the kitchen, serving Randolph Scott his bacon and eggs, and them sitting at their pool next to each other on the diving board, which looks a little bit, odd. But they did it as a joke. And that's what Cary Grant had said. He said, "We did it as a joke." And then these publicists just blew it all out of proportion. So that's what, an interesting story that Dick Band told me, and this is a very interesting story. He had told me that one time Hal Roach got a phone call while Dick was there, and Hal Roach had said, "Do you want to meet this couple? They're writing a book on Cary Grant. We're going to go to some restaurant and meet them." And I hope I get the story right. Dick Band, if you're listening, please forgive me. But anyhow, what happened was they sat down, they met the couple, and the first question out of their mouths were, "So tell us about Cary Grant's homosexual relationship with Randolph Scott." And Hal Roach got up and he said, "Dick, I'm out of here." And he walked out. And Dick Band looked at the two people and he said, "I guess the interview is over." And it was. And driving home, Hal Roach was complaining. He said, "They're not gay. Cary Grant is always with women, and so is Randy Scott. I've been to their home, and they've always got women around. So it was just, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with being gay. I mean, I'm for everybody. It's perfectly fine with me. But I mean, I just don't like when there's these rumors about people. I mean, I one of my favorite actors is William Haynes. I
Yeah.
get the biggest. My wife and I get the biggest charge out of a William Haynes movie. He has so much fun with all his mugging and everything. But so that's
Yeah,
my
that's
story. Oh, other stories about Cary Grant though that night. Um, I remember that people were asking him, "So how do you stay in such good shape?" And this was the year he died, because he died at the age. This was in '86, and he died at the age of 82, shortly after. And he said that he really doesn't exercise. He's never had a facelift. It's just that he tries to eat the right things, and he goes swimming. And he talked about his sex life somewhat, but I don't think I want to go there.
no.
He said at his age he still has sex with his wife, which I thought was very interesting. I thought, wow, good for you, Carrie, man. I'll tell you.
Oh, why not?
Uh, but let's see, what else did he say? Oh, one woman got up, and this was a rude question. She asked him, she said, "Mr. Grant, you've been married 5 or 6 times. How come you never married me?" And he said, "Because, my dear, you didn't ask me." But he always was like, like this,
Yeah,
rapid fire. Any question that, would take the average person aback and have them stumbling left and right, he was able to get around it. He was
sure.
amazing. And Cary Grant, I mean, Cary Grant and James Cagney, if you didn't know this before, they're my two favorite actors of all time.
Sure. Yeah, well, those are two good ones for sure.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Let's see. Well, we're kind of jumping around to different topics, but
Okay.
you've mentioned Dick Ban and some of the people that you knew. So, do you want to expand on that? Some of the other people that you've met through the film collecting community?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of my favorite ones, as I told you, I was in furniture retail for years, and I suppose I was a decent salesperson. But one day, this old woman came in with a younger woman, and I was with, one of my colleagues, said to me, "Lou, you know who that is?" And I said, "No, who?" And she said, "That's Joanne Woodward." And
Hmm.
I said, "Really?" And so as I was getting closer to her, I saw that it was she. And I gave, behind my back, I gave the thumbs up to my colleague, saying that, yeah, it is Joanne Woodward. So they wanted to buy a bed, so for their guest room. And the woman was Joanne was very nice, and I pretended I didn't know who she was. So what happened was, she bought the bed, and I was I tried putting on the most charm I possibly could, if that's possible. And as I'm writing up the order, she said to me, "Do you want my name?" And I said, "Oh, I know who you are." And immediately she put her hand right up to my face, like as if to say, "No more. Let's not go there.
Hmm.
Let's not talk about me being famous or me being Joanne Woodward." So I was sweating, and I'm writing the order down, and I asked her address. And I stopped and I said, "Miss Woodward, I just want to say that I find it quite the coincidence that you came in today." And she said, "Oh, why?" I said, "Well, yesterday my wife came home with a DVD." And I said, "And we have home theater in our house. We have film and we have DVD. We have a video projector. You can see it up there. And the projectors are over there, by the way." And so, anyhow, I said, she brought this film home, this DVD, and she said, "Lou, I want you to see this movie. It's called Road to Perdition." And I said, "Well, Sue, I've seen all the Bob Hope Bing Crosby road pictures." And Joanne started laughing, and she said, "Oh," she said, "Lou, how did you like it?" I said, "Joanne, I loved it. It was such a good movie." And she said, Tommy Hanks makes Pop laugh all the time. He just loves working with Tommy Hanks." And the daughter chimed in. She said, "Lou, you were talking about film. What gauge do you show your movies in?" I said, "Well, 16 millimeter." And she said, "Really?" And she said, and Joanne asked me, "Well, how many do you have?" And at that time, I had about 800 or so. I said, "Well, about 800 movies." And she said, "Really? Really? Wow, this is terrific." So she asked me, "So, Lou, what's your favorite movie?" I said, "Well, I have two of them." I said, "Dodsworth, directed by William Wyler, and Of Mice and Men." And she said, "The Milestone film, right?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, Pop and I used to be good friends with Betty Field, who lived here in Stanford, right behind me down here. And I had never met her, by the way. I wish I had. So anyhow, she said to me, "Did you know that Betty Field lived in Stanford before she died?" I said, "Yes, I did know that." And so the daughter chimed in. And she said, "Who's Betty Field?" She said, "Oh, she was a tremendous actress." And she was going on and on. So she said, Lou, you'll never guess what my favorite movie is." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Do you have any Universal horror films?" And I'm thinking, Joanne Woodward likes Universal horror films? Isn't that kind of, considered lowbrow to someone like Joanne Woodward? She loves the old, movies made by Universal. And she
Yeah.
said, "Lou, my favorite movie is The Mummy with Boris Karloff." And she was riddled with arthritis. And she got up and she starts walking like Karloff. And in the meantime, another customer came in and she's sitting on a bed waiting for me. And I said to the woman, I said, "Ma'am, this is, 10 minutes while she was waiting. I said, "Ma'am, I'll be with you." She goes, "Oh no, I'm enjoying this tremendously." And so Joanne Woodward said, "Lou, listen, I want to come back here and I want Pop to meet you. And would it be okay if I borrowed some of your films?" And I said, "Absolutely." I said, "I'll even drop them off at your house if you'd like." And she said, "Great." So one day on my day off, my boss calls me and he said, "Lou, you'll never guess who is in here looking for you." I said, "Who?" He goes, "Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward."
Wow.
And they never came back. But
Oh,
anyhow, but you know what? It was just such a great thing that happened. Another great story that I have for you was, and this is one that I've really never told. It must be about 15, 20 years ago. I had heard that John Gilbert's daughter,
hmm,
Beatrice Gilbert Fountain, was living in Greenwich, Connecticut. And so I got her address, and she lived by the water. And I contacted her, and I said, "Is it okay if I come and talk?" Because I'm really a big fan of your dad and your mom. Her mom was Leatrice Joy.
yeah.
So she said, "Sure." So I rang the doorbell, and I was dressed in a jacket and tie. So I wanted to look nice. I didn't want to look like, my usual sloppy self. And she looks at me and she goes with a very, I don't know, her voice was almost like she had studied in the theater. And she goes, "I know you." And I looked at her and I said, "I know your voice too." And I said, "Where could I have heard it?" And she goes, "Come in." And we're sitting down and she said, "I'm going to make some tea and I'm going to bring out some crumpets. Would you like some?" I said, "No, thanks, Leatrice. That's okay." She said, "No, I'll bring them out." So she brings them out. And I'm taken aback by the china set that she had. And I said, "This is the most beautiful china I've ever seen in my life." She goes, "Oh, C.B. DeMille gave me these back in the 1920s. I'm
Oh, wow.
thinking, wow, I'm drinking out of a cup that, Rudolph Valentino might have drank out of,
Yeah.
or John Gilbert or whatever. So she's sitting there and she's going to me, "Lou Sabini, Lou Sabini." She goes, "Sabini's Furniture." And I said,
Oh,
"Yeah." She goes, "That's where I know you." She said, "That was Mother's favorite store." I said, "That's where I know you." I said, "Do you mean to tell me I was waiting on Leatrice Joy and I didn't even know it?" She
wow.
said, "Yes." So I had waited on Leatrice Joy a bunch of times, not knowing even who Leatrice Joy was. Back then I didn't know who she was, but back when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. And she, luckily I had seen a lot of her dad's movies by that time. I guess it was about 15 years ago. And she sent her son to one of my classes, and he introduced my print of Queen Christina to the class, and they really enjoyed that. And he looked just like John Gilbert. So he got
Yeah.
all the good genes. And Leatrice Joy, I was amazed to hear, she was in the movie of Human Hearts. She plays a little girl that Jimmy Stewart's younger character, I think Gene Reynolds, plays Jimmy Stewart as a boy. It's his girlfriend in the early years in the movie of Human Hearts. So Leatrice Joy had a pretty substantial part in that. So
Yeah.
she was trying to break into the movies.
Yeah. Well, again, these are all good stories.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've got a couple other things in my notes, and I mentioned your pre-code book, and you talked about Everson getting you into pre-code. What was the progression from seeing Babyface and Three on a Match to digging
Oh my.
deeper into that subject?
I couldn't get enough of it. I mean, I think the next movie we saw was Night Nurse. So, we were seeing all the real good stuff. And I mean, and then we would see some of the later on, I think he was running out of films. We would see movies like, what's the one with Barbara Stanwyck and Joel McRae? Oh, shoot. I can't remember the title of it. Doggone. It's not very good. But, I mean, we saw some, some real good ones. Let me think. Skyscraper Souls,
Yeah,
God, and I'm drawing a blank here. Well, I mean, Heroes for Sale I saw on my own,
yeah,
but Caller Savage with
yeah,
Clara Bow. I mean, I have a print of that now. Zoo in Budapest.
yeah.
That was another one he showed us. Oh, another one that we really loved was The Yellow Ticket from 1931 with Alyssa Landy. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so. I've heard of it.
Check it out. You could see it online. It's a real good film, pre-code. And I mean, some of those Fox films. I mean, Bill Everson years ago was able to uncover a lot of them with Alex and Dick Gordon, who were Bill's best friends, and they went to 20th Century Fox back in the 1950s after the fire, and they salvaged some 35 millimeter prints of those movies. I mean, the negatives obviously don't exist anymore. One of the gems that they got was Bulldog Drummond Strikes Back with Ronald Colman.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Oh, it's such a good movie. I just wish that would come out on Blu-ray. I
Yeah,
understand some sort of problem with film rights with that movie, but yeah, it's just terrific.
yeah. We did see it at Capitol Fest. I don't know if you were there that year.
Yes, I was.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I've seen it so many times. I mean, I have a copy of it. It's a bootleg, but yeah, and it's not very good. But it's fine for now.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll get one later on. Another thing I'd like to talk about is my real life.
Oh, sure. Uh,
And
so some of the people out there might not know what that is.
oh, okay, it's not about my life. My real life is a group that a friend of mine started on Facebook. His name is Dan Burke, and I met Dan in 1975 when Sue and I were first married. Sue and I used to live in an apartment by the water, and I used to play softball with a bunch of guys. I was on a team, and Dan Burke was on there, and we became friends because Dan liked old movies. And Dan, we would go out for lunch and we would talk about old film, and we weren't close, but we got along very well. It's just I don't like going out with the guys. I'd rather stay home. I'm a homebody. I like going out to dinner with Sue and other people, but I don't like going out with the guys per se. Although I've been doing it lately as I'm older. Anyhow, Dan called me one day and he said, and I was out in California because I was in a documentary about Hal Roach. They were filming me, and they flew me out to California. The flight was free, and so was the hotel. The hotel. They flew me out, and Dan Burke called me when I was in my hotel or on my cell phone, and he said, "Lou, I have a proposition for you. I want to start a Facebook group called My Real Life. It's going to be all about you." And I kind of thought, I don't want to do this, Dan. I said, first of all, I don't want to be sitting there bragging about myself. This is the first time, by the way, Andrew, I've ever sat and talked about myself per se.
Hmm.
I usually just talk about the movies and that's it.
Right. Well, that's why I wanted to have you on here to learn more about you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it because you know what? As I'm getting older, once I go, it's all gone.
Hmm.
you know? So anyhow, um, Dan Burke called me up and he wanted to start this thing. And I said, I'm out in California right now. I really don't want to be bothered. Call me when you get home. I'll think about it. So he called me up and he said, Lou, I started the group already. You could do it if you'd like, or you could just say, no, I don't want to do it. And he said, just take a look at it. It's easy. It's easy to maneuver. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? Let me give it a week and try it out. And I did. And I invited all the people who I knew. And it got to be probably the most successful classic film group on Facebook. That's
Yeah.
what people have told me. And we've had so many great people on there, and they're still on there. I mean, we had Isa Wayne, John Wayne's daughter, but she doesn't do anything. We've got Dana Andrews' daughter. She was on there. But a lot of these people would keep a very low profile. They'd put them, they'd be incognito. They'd have a fake name or something. But, we had Donna Reed's daughter, Mary Owen, who's been a house guest of ours.
Hmm.
Paul Henry's daughter, who stayed at our home for a weekend one time. Of course, Catherine Weiler, who's William Weiler's oldest daughter, who's been to my house. Melanie is a good friend of mine. She lives in Westport. And so, I mean, we had a lot of great people on there. Lou Costello's daughter,
Hmm.
Phyllis Thaxter's daughter was on there. And it just was such a great group. What the reason why I stopped doing it, I was becoming so disenchanted with Facebook. They were
Yeah.
using me as a guinea pig. Did I say something derogatory about Italians there? No, I'm just. They were using me as a guinea pig, so to speak, where people would send me private messages, and I would have to punch in a code to accept their messages, and it didn't always work. And people would email me saying, how come you're not answering my messages? And I kept on going back to them to Facebook saying, hey, what are you doing to me? And they would say, well, we're using this as an experiment.
Huh.
And they never stopped doing it. Plus, now there was AI.
Right.
We were inundated with AI garbage
Yeah.
on my real life. But they did have an option where you could eliminate all AI. But that didn't mean that people who were members couldn't bring AI into the group, which they were doing.
Yeah. It's a mess.
It was a total mess. And I mean, I just I was going through my news feed, seeing all the garbage. I mean, it's just a cesspool. And I've become reconciled to the fact that I don't need this anymore. I need to go on with my life. And I have friends. I've got you. If you ever wanted to come to Stanford and spend a day with me, I would be most honored to have you come here one day.
Oh, I
And
appreciate that.
you can see whatever you want to see. Incidentally, that's something else I want to tell about you. Um, you know, you're one of a kind, and I mean that in a very positive way. You're a special, special person. And, I know that a lot of young people aren't into what you and I are into. Years ago, when Sue and I used to go to parties, whether it be a Christmas party or whatever, all I'd have to mention, and this is like 30, 40 years ago, all I'd have to mention is old movies. And the party would be about Sue and me. We would be talking about movies the whole night. And it was so much fun. Now I go to a party and I mention old movies. Oh, you mean black and white movies? I don't watch that crap. And that's the way it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to keep pushing it and pushing it. And years ago, Robert Osborne said something that I just loved. He said, once you sit a young person down to watch an old movie, after 10 minutes, they are hooked. Sadly, as I'm getting older, I am seeing that a lot of old people get crabby, except Lou Sabini. And it's true. Old people do get crabby. And when I've shown, like one time I was showing at a senior residence, they said, do you have any Marx Brothers films? I said, I'm going to show you one of their best, Horse Feathers, which happens to be my personal favorite.
Yeah.
So I showed it. There wasn't a laugh throughout the whole movie.
Really?
And I was like mortified. How can this be? And they said, that was stupid.
Wow.
And even on our Friday night movie screenings that Sue and I do weekly, I noticed that my contemporaries, if I show The Three Stooges or Our Gang or Charlie Chase or Laurel and Hardy, there isn't a laugh.
Wow.
Nobody laughs. And I've told Sue, sadly, this is the end of a chapter for me. But young people still do have senses of humor. So keep that up. Old people just don't, sadly. I mean, it's the old people who are brought up on it, like me and the late Ralph Celentano, bless him,
Yeah.
and other people out there. Stan Taffel, and well, Stan's a young kid compared to me, but Jack Roth and other folks.
Yeah.
But I mean, just keep up the good work. I mean, and don't despair, because you are truly special, and that's coming from the heart, my friend. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess the problem with me is I'm showing movies to, as you say, older people, and there are a lot of my screenings lately that don't get any laughs either. So I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing, here's a story for you. One time I showed, and here's another thing about showing movies to an older crowd. For some reason, they're not listening. They're watching the movie. So if Cary Grant falls on his behind in The Awful Truth, they laugh. There'll be a chuckle. But all that wonderful dialogue that you hear in a Preston Sturges film, it goes right over their heads. They have no
Well,
idea
I
what's
think they
going
can't hear it either.
That could be, or else they're just not listening, or they're just not able to comprehend. So that just drives me bonkers
Yeah.
about that. So one time I showed The Awful Truth at a senior residence, and this one, when I was showing it, it didn't go over well at all. And the people said to me, "Can't you show something serious?" And the following week was Veterans Day. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to fix their asses. So I showed The Fighting Sullivans.
Hmm.
Oh, man. I should never have done that, because that was getting even with a bunch of old people. I turned on the lights and everybody was just sobbing, and they just left. And I thought, oh, Lou, that was so mean. You shouldn't have done that.
Wow.
but I kind of got some kind of happiness out of that.
It sounds like something I would do.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. You see, you're like me. Another thing I wanted to tell you about, we're going to go back a little bit. When I was a youngster, as I told you, I was into Laurel and Hardy, and I went to the second banquet at the Lambs Club, the old Lambs Club in New York. And my parents took me. I was 13 years old at the time. 13? Yeah, 13. I was going on 14. And they took me to this thing, and I didn't know anybody there. I mean, I knew who Leonard Maltin was, and Leonard's 2 years older than me. And he had, there was a table at this banquet, and Leonard Maltin had his group. It was a junior tent. The Tit for Tat tent of Teaneck, New Jersey, was run by Leonard Maltin. And Joe Franklin was there, and Chuck McCann, who I knew. And I knew of William K. Everson because one of my favorite books was The Bad Guys by Bill Everson. And but there were these other people, I had no idea who they were. And around they had adorned around the whole banquet hall photographs of Laurel and Hardy. And my mother's taking me around. She goes, "Show me these pictures. Let's see if you could identify them." And I'm going, and I'm saying, okay, that's Babes in Toyland, and that's Way Out West, blah, blah, blah. And I came to one where I couldn't identify. And my mother goes to me, "You mean you can't identify that picture?" And she goes, "Shame on you." And this guy behind us, he said, "Oh, that's the Wizard of Oz. Oliver Hardy's playing the Tin Man."
Hmm.
And my mother turns around, she goes, "Oh my God, that's Eddie Bracken."
Oh,
That night, Eddie Bracken was there, Raymond Walburn,
wow.
Bernard Nadell. You might have heard of Al Kilgore, but he was a famous artist, caricaturist. He did the Rocky and Bullwinkle comic strips.
Oh,
And he and I became very good friends. William K. Everson was there. I'm trying to think of who else. Ida Laurel. I sat with Ida Laurel, so that was my first meeting with her. I remember that night they showed The Live Ghost, the music box, and they showed reel one of Lucky Dog, which is all they had found. And it was Bill Everson who found it. So that was new to everybody. But the funny thing about the evening was that Raymond Walburn got up. And this was back in 1966. And he said, "A lot of people don't know this, but I made a movie with Oliver Hardy once. I did a whole bit with him. It was in a movie called Riding High." And everybody was sitting there saying, "Wait a minute, Raymond Walburn wasn't in Riding High." Now, they were thinking of the 1943 film with that
right.
title. weren't thinking of the 1950 film, which had never made it to TV as of yet. So they all thought that this guy was just going senile, that he didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And lo and behold, Oliver Hardy did have a cameo in Riding High. And it's a darn good one, too. But I thought that was kind of interesting. But that was a very interesting night for me. And another big event for me in my lifetime, two of them, after I wrote my book, Behind the Scenes, that They Were Expendable, that book got the New York Times it was on the New York Times bestseller list the first week it was out. And it brought me all over the country. I mean, I was at the Library of Congress introducing the movie They Were Expendable. I was at Cinecon. Cinecon was a ball. I mean, Stan Taffel took me all over the place. And let's see, they invited John Wayne's kids, but Ethan Wayne had told me that he couldn't make it because he said, look, I'm not going up on Labor Day weekend from Newport Beach up to LA. He said, it'll take me hours. So I'm sorry, I can't make it, Lou. But they had a table set up in the lobby of Grauman's Egyptian Theater for me. So after I gave my introduction to the film, I went outside to sign books and autographs. And Dan Burke was there, who's the grandson of John Ford. And he walked over to my wife and he said, where's Lou? Because she was sitting alone. She said, oh, he's out signing books. So he said, oh, I'm going to go hang out with Lou. And what I didn't know about Dan Ford, he was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He was on their staff, their writing staff.
Huh.
And he was telling me some great stories about Johnny Carson. He said, no matter what they say about Johnny Carson, he was one of the nicest people you could ever be around. He said, sure, he had people he didn't like, most notably Bob Hope.
Right.
And I asked him, I said, so what was wrong with Bob Hope? He said, well, they would ask Bob Hope to come on the show. But if Bob Hope wasn't doing anything in the meantime, he wouldn't appear. It had to be to promote one of his own specials that he was currently doing, even if it was on a rival network.
Right.
So that's what Johnny Carson couldn't stand about Bob Hope. But Dan Burke told me a wonderful story. He said that one night, Johnny Carson said, we only have time for one more guest, and I'm going to have him come right out here right now, and I don't need to introduce him. And out walks Cary Grant. And Cary Grant sits down. Everybody's, just going crazy. And he says, hello, Johnny. And Johnny Carson goes, oh, Cary, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. He did it all as a joke. And I thought that was a marvelous story.
I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, it was great. And another thing that happened to me because of this book, Behind the Scenes, that They Were Expendable. I did a book signing at Bryant Park as well as talking about the book, and that went over very well. It was widely attended at Bryant Park. I flipped out when I saw how many people were there. I was like, oh my gosh. And Karen Everson, Bill Everson's widow, she was there too. So,
yeah. Well, I think you kind of took over my show. I lost some of my questions, but that's okay.
Do you have any more? You think of anything else?
Well, yeah, it's kind of anticlimactic now, I think, to go back to the things I had prepared. But I guess there's a couple other things I can throw at you. But well, just for fun, I wanted to mention Wheeler and Woolsey. How did you get into them?
Well, that's very simple. I mean, the only way, and I told you this over the phone the other day, the only way I knew of Wheeler and Woolsey was through the short, The Stolen Jewels, obviously. And, I was not that impressed, as I'm sure a lot of people aren't, these two guys slapping each other, which they had done in Rio Rita. And I don't think Sue was very amused by them either. But when AMC, American Movie Classics, first aired on television, they had all those great RKO pre-codes on there. And Sue and I just recorded every single one of them. We didn't care what the heck it was. And, we just went nuts over movies like Diplomaniacs, Kentucky Colonels, Cockeyed Cavaliers, Hips Hips Hooray, Caught Plastered. I mean, all of which I think I have them all in 16 millimeter.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I loved Wheeler and Woolsey. And a lot of people might not know this, but Burt Wheeler was a member of the Lambs Club at one time.
Right.
And he contacted Stan Laurel in the 60s because he was doing TV commercials. And he said to Stan, he said, why don't you get into this too? Because we're making a lot of money for virtually doing nothing. And Stan said, nah, I'm not interested in doing that. But yeah, Burt Wheeler, they say he was the nicest guy. Jack McCabe, who was the exhausted ruler of the Sons of the Desert, used to tell people that Burt Wheeler would sit at the bar at the Lambs Club, and if people started talking about, oh, the movie Hips Hips Hooray, he would sit there singing, "Just keep on doing what you're doing," and he would remember all the songs. I mean, he said the man was just a delightful man to be around.
Yeah, I always heard that about him. It's too
Yeah,
bad. It's too bad so many of these people were before our time and we couldn't meet them.
yeah. Well, thank God for film.
Yeah.
They live on through that, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad. I'm thankful that I was exposed to all this at a young age. That my childhood was kind of lonely because we lived in North Stamford, and I virtually had nobody to play with, so to speak. And my mother, believe it or not, kept me out of school until first grade. I never
Hmm.
went to nursery school or kindergarten. I went right into the frying pan, first grade, Catholic school. The first day of school, I'll never forget, the bell rang at 8:25 and I tapped the kid in front of me. And I remember his name. His name was Ed Volpe. I said, "What was that?" And he said, "Oh, that's the first bell." And I said, "Oh." I said, "What's your name?" He goes, "Oh, my name's Ed Volpe." I said, "Well, my name's Lou Sabini." And the next thing I see a hand coming at me. Boom! And I landed on the floor. And the nun had slapped me in the face. She said, "You don't talk after the first bell." And I remember later on we went to the lavatory. At 10:15, you would go to the lavatory, different word for the boys' room. I thought we were going to dissect frogs, when I heard the word lavatory. So anyhow, I looked in the mirror and I had this big red handprint on my face. And I thought, oh my God, if my mother sees this when I get home, she's going to go nuts. Because, a nun could do no wrong back then. So, but that was my first day of school. It wasn't very pleasant, but it was fine. I mean, that's the nuns, they did what they had to do, I guess.
Yeah, well, my dad is Irish Catholic. I'm sure he could tell you about the nuns.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, a lot of people are very bitter about that, and I feel like, you know what? I came home and I said to my mother one time because I got slapped again in school, and I came home and I said to my mother, I said, Sister so and so slapped me, and she said, "Well, what were you doing wrong?" I said, "Nothing. It was the kid next to me." And she said, "Well, you just learned something very important about life." And I said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "Life isn't always fair." I
Yeah.
said, "You know what? You're right. Life isn't always fair." And that's something that I've always professed throughout my entire life, that, stuff happens, that's life. Not everything can go perfectly. And, Sue and I have had our little, obstacles that we've had to go through together. And, but together we were able to, persevere, and we won out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I guess we should wrap it up pretty soon, but
okay,
I guess I was trying to think of what would be the appropriate way to end, and I've never heard how you met Sue. Would you mind telling that story?
sure. This is an interesting story. Um, I met Sue. It was in 1973. It was the day before Thanksgiving in 1973. I think it was November 23rd. I'm not sure, but there was a discotheque here in Port Chester, New York. It was over the line, and the drinking age in Connecticut was 21, but in Port Chester, over the line, it was 18. So all the younger kids, because Sue's 3 years younger than me, would go over the line to go drinking. So I showed up at this discotheque and it was packed. And I was, packed. And the kids were dancing on the floor. And I'm with a friend of mine who had been in the army, and he was home on leave. And we're watching the kids dancing on the floor. And this blonde came over to me and she said, "Lou Sabini, why don't you sit at our table?" And I knew her vaguely from high school. She was a cheerleader. She later became a fashion model, and she dated Keith Richards of the Rolling
Hmm.
Stones, believe it or not. Her name is Donna David. She's a good friend of ours.
Hmm.
We still see her all the time too. She still comes over. So there was this cute brunette sitting opposite me, and it was Sue. And Sue came over, and Donna was introducing me, and she said Lou goes to School of Visual Arts, and he wants to be a film historian. And Sue came over, and she said I could do a Marx Brothers imitation for you. And she did that bit. I guess it's from Room Service. Hello, what is it? You say you need ice water? Well, bring some onions. That'll make your
Oh,
ice water.
that's the coconuts.
No, okay, the coconuts. Okay, I'm sorry. Um, I hate to say this, but I think I'm the only person on earth who doesn't like the movie The Coconuts. I love
Mm.
all their other Paramounts. I think that's the weakest one, but c'est la vie. But anyhow, after that, it was like, wow, this is something. She likes, the Marx Brothers. So we started dating, but I didn't ask her out. The following week at school, I was sitting in my screenwriting class, and there was a knock at the door, and it was Bill Everson. And he asked my professor, is Lou Sabini in the class? And he said, yes. And he said, may I see him? So I go out and I said, yes, Professor Everson. He said, Lou, what are you doing today after class? I said, well, after this class, I'm going home. I don't have anything else. I'm taking the train back to Stanford. He said, would you like to come to Wesleyan College with me? Because I'm showing Sabotage by Hitchcock. And I'm also going to be showing for the first time the interview I did with Alfred Hitchcock because Frenzy had just come out. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So as we're riding on the train, Bill asked me, he said, so are you going out with anybody? Because I used to bring this girl over to his apartment, and he knew she was not into old movies at all. And I said, no, she doesn't like old movies. And he said, oh, you'll find somebody else. I said, well, I met this cute girl at this discotheque in Portchester, New York, and she lives here in New Haven. She goes to Southern. And he said, why don't you call her up? So I called her up. She was listed in the phone book. I called her up and I asked her out, and I brought her about a week later to School of Visual Arts for one of my classes with Bill Everson. And that day I was sitting in the student lounge with a couple of my buddies, and Bill patted me on the back and he goes, Lou? And I said, yes, Professor Everson. He goes, I like this one. So he liked Sue. So that's how, as a matter of fact, I asked Bill to be my best man
Oh,
when we got married, and he said, I can't do it, but I will come to your wedding. And he did come to our wedding. Yeah. I mean, we were that close. He was just he was my mentor. He was like a second father to me. And I think in a way, my father was almost jealous of him because my dad and I were very close, but my father knew nothing about old movies. He wasn't even interested. And when Bill was dying, Karen, his wife, called me one day and she said, Lou, would you come into the city? Bill wants to see you. And I thought, oh, geez, yes, I'll be there. And my father said to me, I'll drive you. He said, and I'll just wait in the car. So he did. And I just thought, wow, Dad, that's such a sweet thing to do that for me. So that was not the last time I saw Bill either, although he was in such bad shape. Karen rented a car and she brought him to our house to spend the day, but he could just sit in a chair all day. It took us like 15 minutes to get him down into our screening room. And at one point he asked us if we could just leave so he could nap. So it was a very sad time when he passed away, but he's sorely missed. And I know a lot of my friends, my contemporaries miss him greatly. I mean, all you had to do was ask him about a movie and he would say, oh, I'll loan that to you. Or, yes, I'll show that to you. I mean, he was just wonderful.
yeah,
Learned a lot from that man. They don't make them like that anymore. Believe me, Andrew, they don't.
pure.
I tried to be like him. I tried to emulate him in every way I possibly could to no avail. But um, I guess I feel like I did okay for myself, I guess.
Yeah,
But I like my screening room, huh? Hmm?
it's nice. Yeah,
Yeah, it's 30 feet. It goes back 30 feet, and the projectors are back there behind the glass, and the
it's hard for me to see from back there. Let me take a look there. Yep.
we've got a bar over there. There's a wet bar. It goes into the wall,
Yeah.
and the video projector is up on the ceiling. But yeah, we're pretty proud of this room, and we spend a lot of time in here, Sue and I.
Yeah, it looks
Matter of
really
fact,
cool.
Tonight we have people coming over. We're showing random harvest. And that's another thing. Everybody wants to see, nobody wants to see anything obscure. Me, I love showing the obscure, the out of the ordinary. It's always the classics. That's all they want to see.
Yeah,
If I only had one print of Casablanca, they'd be asking for that every week.
right.
It's sad.
Yeah. Well, I guess I usually ask my guests. Sorry, I can't talk. Yeah, I usually ask my guests if they have anything to promote. So, is there anything coming up? Are you writing another book or anything like that that you want to talk
No,
about?
I'm just waiting to die. Kidding. Just kidding. No, I'm not. I'm pretty much right now. Sue and I became grandparents uh, almost 3 years ago, and we spend a lot of time with her. As a matter of fact, we've exposed her to what she lovingly calls the gang kids
Right.
or gang comedies. I mean, I have to watch what I show her. I can't show her films like Mama's Little Pirate because it'll scare the daylights out of her.
Right.
I pretty much show her movies like Our Gang Follies of 36 and 38, Reunion and Rhythm, where they're singing and dancing. But she loves them. And she's even said she's having a birthday March 23rd. And she said to her mommy, I want to invite the gang kids, so
Yeah, that's sweet.
that chance. Yeah, that's another thing. I've Jerry Tucker's been to my house, and Shirley Jean Rickards. She spent the weekend here.
Wow.
She was another. She was a doll. She was a lovely lady. Her daughter Melody Measures is on Facebook. She's a sweetheart.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, that's, you've talked about younger people keeping this stuff alive, and I guess if you're showing them to your granddaughter, then there's another generation that'll keep it going.
I sure hope so. I mean, my kids love they I shouldn't say love. They like old movies. It's just that they haven't got the time. I mean, they're both career people. Lauren's a director at a nursery school in Darien, Connecticut, and Michael works for the Wynn Hotel in the new Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas. And they're both married, and they have a lot of responsibility. And living in Stamford, Connecticut, we're one of the highest. It's very expensive to live here, and it's one of the most expensive places to live in the country. It's terrible, and if they say it's the worst place to live if you're retired, and I've been retired since I was 65, and the same thing with Sue. But we're doing fine. We
Yeah.
still, we still eat 3 meals a day, and we have a roof over our head. We have a nice house, which I hope you will get to see one of these days. And Salary.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I guess we can wrap it up. But
That's all, folks.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Lou. I don't, we don't get to talk very much for this length of time very often, so I'm happy to do it.
Call me
And
anytime you want. Okay. If I don't pick up, I'll call you. Just leave a message and I will call you back. Okay.
okay, I'm happy to stay in touch anytime.
Okay. Take good care of yourself and stay well.
You too, buddy.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.